principal of the former Bloom Shapiro, now Clifton Larson Allen, and Santo Carta, excuse me, principal at Clifton Allen, and Melanie Kroll is here with us. Melanie was one of the auditors on site when with Santo when the audit was performed. So I've been told that Mr. Carta is going to run the presentation, and Vanessa, I understand you're going to give the presentation tonight.
Yes, thank you, Pete. So both Santo and I are going to give the presentation.
Yes. So do I just, I've never used this before. I'm going to assume that I need to hit share content. Let me try this.
Mr. Chairman, Matt Hart, manager. Oh, looks like we've got it. Okay.
We got it.
Great.
Okay. Okay. So let me just.
Great. Thanks, Santo.
And before you start, can you just please identify yourself for the record each time you speak so we'll know who's speaking?
Sure. This is Vanessa Rosito from Clifton Larson Allen. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having us tonight. We have a short presentation to go through that summarizes the audit engagement for fiscal year 2020. On the agenda tonight, I'm going to talk about the terms of the engagement, give you a little bit executive summary, go over some pretty high-level financial highlights. Obviously, if you have questions on a specific page or what have you with financial statements, please just feel free to ask it. I'm going to turn it over to Santo to go over the federal and state single audit and also the governance communication. And then I'll wrap it up to talk about the laundry list of upcoming GASB pronouncements and a little bit about the new firm CLA, previously Bloom Shapiro. So as far as the terms of the engagement, we were hired to express opinions on whether the basic financial statements are presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. We also issue an in relation to opinion on the schedule of expenditures of federal awards and the schedule of expenditures of state financial assistance, otherwise known as the federal and state single audit. We do also express an opinion on the compliance related to those programs that we test in connection with the federal and state single audit. We do also provide a report.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's all right. On internal control over financial reporting and compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, and grants, and also on internal control over compliance related to the major and federal state programs that we test. So as far as the results of the engagement, we have issued an unmodified or clean opinion on the financial statements. It basically means that everything is fairly stated in accordance with accounting standards. It is the best, highest opinion available, and we did not report any findings on internal control over internal control and compliance. So clean report, if you will. As far as the federal single audit, we also issued a clean opinion over the major federal programs that we tested, and we did not find any compliance findings or significant deficiencies in internal control over those programs that we selected to test. Similarly, for the state single audit, also a clean opinion on the state programs, the major state programs, and in addition, no compliance findings or significant deficiencies. So clean opinions over all the reports, financial statements, federal single audit, and state single audit. So the next section is as I stated earlier, just a treetop level look at the results of operations for the town. This first slide looks at all of the governmental activities of the town aggregated together, and then the business type activities of the town aggregated together. So those are your leisure services fund. So just to start out with governmental activities, this is the balance sheet. So in governmental financial statements, not only do we have assets, liabilities, and net position, we have two other categories called deferred outflows of resources and deferred inflows of resources. So I'll talk about those last. So if you look at 2019 compared to 2020 for the governmental activities, really nothing of significance, change from last year to this year. In the long-term liabilities, in 2019, you had 627 million of total liabilities, and this year you had 715 million of total liabilities. So an increase of about $90 million. So what makes up that increase is a couple of things. You did issue new bonds, new money and a refunding to total about $55 million. You did pay down debt of about $60 million. And then your pension and OPEB liabilities increased about $90 million. So the net position decreased from negative $138 million to negative $155 million. The other two categories on the balance sheet, deferred outflows and deferred inflows. So most of these amounts are due to the pension and OPEB liability. So rather than accounting for the change in the liability all in the current year, certain things get amortized over 4 or 5 or 6 years. So those items, changes in assumptions, changes in investment performance compared to what was forecasted, those things are brought onto the balance sheet and amortized. So that's what the majority of these amounts represent. So there was an increase from last year to this year in the deferred outflows of resources, and the deferred inflows was pretty much the same from last year. On to the business type activities. These, again, do you have a question?
No.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I clicked on it early. I'm so sorry.
Okay. So leisure services fund, again, no real change last year to this year for total assets. From last year to this year in the liabilities section, that increased about $1.3 million. That increase is basically made up of the increase of pension and OPEB liabilities. So that's really the significant change from last year to this year for that. Okay, on to the next slide, Santo. So the next slide presents your major funds of the town of West Hartford. So it encompasses the general fund, the capital projects fund, the CDBG rehabilitation fund, and the debt service funds. Smaller funds, if you will, of the town are aggregated together into the non-major governmental funds column. So just looking at the results of the general fund from last year to this year, fund balance increased about $3 million. There's a couple of things that happened this year. So you did issue bonds. I talked earlier about new money and refunding. So in the general fund, the refunding is accounted for here. There was a premium of almost $6 million that went along with that funding. In the capital projects fund, you did have a decrease in funds of about $2.7 million. And in that fund, the new bonds were accounted for $7 million. There was also a premium along with that issuance, which is accounted for in the debt service fund of $2.3 million. CDBG did not have any change in fund balance. That is, there is no fund balance because expenditures are recognized to the extent of revenues. The debt service fund had an increase in fund balance of about $1.9 million from last year to this year. And then, excuse me, the non-major governmental funds had a decrease of about $1.5 million. So overall, your total governmental funds did have an increase of about $700,000 from 2019 to 2020. Okay. Just some other things to mention for the general fund. The total fund balance was $30.13 million. Of that amount, $298,000 is non-spendable, meaning that that represents the amount of inventory you have in assets. $4.6 million is assigned. There's three reasons for that assigned category. $847,000 is in encumbrances. $2.3 million is in Board of Education non-lapsing. And then $1.5 million was used to balance the 2021 budget, leaving you with $25.2 million of unassigned fund balance. Okay, and moving on to the general fund budget presentation. So this slide shows the revenue piece of the general fund budget. You'll see in the first column the original legally adopted budget, and the next column is the final budget after any transfers or additional appropriations. Compared to that final column is the actual revenue, and then the last column is the variance. So you'll see for June 30th, 2020, the revenues came in just $31,000 less than budget, which in this year of pandemic, et cetera, is, you know, very, very respectable, I would say, that you were pretty much on budget. On the expenditure side of things, again, presentation. So the actual expenditures came in $2.675 million less than budget. So the town did a very good job of keeping the expenditures down, probably not knowing what the year was going to bring. And then on the last slide, second to the last slide, sorry. So on this slide, these are your trust funds that you use to set aside assets to fund the pension liability and the OPEB liability. OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. So the pension trust fund ended the year with $2.6 million return to net position. So you actually did have a very good year for net investment income. That was $10 million, contributions of $28 million, and then benefits and administrative expenses of $35 million. The OPEB trust fund also had a positive return to net position of $2.4 million, contributions of $16 million, investment income of about $400,000, and then the market fluctuations. And then lastly, on the financial piece, just some other statistics that I thought you might be interested in. Property tax collections actually did not change from last year. That was 99.3%. Again, that's great given the year that we had. The net pension liability is $316 million. That is 40.46% funded, and then the OPEB liability is $213.4 million. That is 4.34% funded. So that concludes the financial piece. Unless anybody has any questions, I can turn it over to Santo to move on to the single audits, or we can entertain questions at the end. It's up to you. Okay, Santo?
Okay, can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay. I think I'm
Yes.
unmuted now.
Yes.
Okay, so my name is Santo Carta. I am a director with Clifton Larson Allen. I'll go over a couple of slides here. First one is the federal single audit. For fiscal year 2020, we had total federal awards of $7.8 million. For major programs tested during the year, we had Title I and the Special Education Cluster. We issued an unmodified opinion on major program compliance, and we had no compliance or internal control findings for the federal single audit. Next, we have the state single audit, where we had total expenditures of $32.8 million, of which the major programs tested were Chef Settlement, Open Choice, Community Conservation and Development, Town Aid Road, the Local Bridge Transportation Program, Smart Start, Pilot for Private Colleges and Hospitals, and Municipal Grant and Aid. Here we also had an unmodified opinion on major program compliance. And in addition, there was no compliance or internal control findings. So both reports were clean and we had no findings on anything. So next we have the auditor's communication, where we outline a few items. For fiscal year 2020, there were no new standards adopted, mainly because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which postponed all pronouncements for 12 to 18 months. Next, we have significant estimates. These were the estimates used in the preparation of your financial statements. First one is capital assets and useful lives, allowance for uncollectibles, net pension liability, net OPEB liability, and medical claims liability. We also noted no disagreements with management. Management did not consult with other accountants. We had no difficulties, or no difficulties were encountered in performing the audit. There were no uncorrected misstatements, and we had no independence issues. So next we go back to GASB Standards, which I think Vanessa's going to talk about.
Okay, so I think I said at the beginning there is a laundry list of GASB standards over the next 3 years, so I'm not going to go through each one of them. I'm just going to talk about the ones that are going to impact the town the most. And I also should note that the GASB did issue Statement 95 last year because of the pandemic that delayed implementation of all of these standards. So I may be repeating myself from last year, because this has all been pushed forward 1 year. So Statement 84, which is a new definition of fiduciary activities, that is going to need to be implemented this coming fiscal year. So the town is going to have to look at their current fiduciary activities to ensure that they meet the definition, and also make sure that there are no other activities of the town that do meet this definition and need to be brought into the financial statements. In 2022, Statement 87, which is the lease standard, this, similar to the FASB standard, is requiring all operating leases, whether that be rent paid for something or rent received for something, to not be accounted for as an expense or revenue anymore, but to be accounted for on the balance sheet, similar to a capital lease. So an asset and a liability is going to have to be recorded. So I think what I said last year is that we're going to work with the town on both of these standards to kind of inventory, look at the fiduciary activities, inventory the leases, to get our arms around the scope of this, whether this is going to have any effect of the town. So both the town and the Board of Education are going to have to do this. And then in 2023, similar to the lease standard, Statement 96, which is subscription-based IT arrangements. So these are software arrangements where the town is paying a monthly fee or quarterly fee. This is going to have to be treated like the lease standards, where there's going to have to be an asset and a liability recorded. So probably a good idea while the town is looking at the lease standard to also inventory these sort of arrangements. I feel like there might be more of these arrangements than the operating leases. So, you know, we'll be working with the town to make sure that they're in compliance. And I know it's you know, not applicable for a couple of years, but I think it's important to just start the process now, so it just doesn't surprise us when the implementation year comes up. And then just a little bit about the merger or acquisition, if you will, of Bloom Shapiro by CLA. So Clifton Larson Allen is a you know, a firm that was 10 times bigger than Bloom Shapiro, really not active in New England, did not have a very big presence in New England. So it made sense from both sides to join together. So the merger was effective January 1st. They're really great firm. You know, I've had a ton of meetings with the head of government, same values and culture that Bloom Shapiro had. It's really not going to affect our clients that much because the teams are still going to be the same, because they don't really have a presence in New England, other than, you know, just having more resources for our employees and for our clients. They do have a significant government practice. They are actually the largest auditor of states, and they serve about 3,500 government clients. And our contact information is on the next slide, and I don't have Melanie's contact information because she was added after I did this, so I apologize, Melanie. But if anyone has any questions after the presentation, you know, here's our contact information, so please reach out to us. And then I will turn it over to the group for any questions.
Mr. Chairman, Matt Hart, Town Manager, I guess we would turn it back to you then, and would thank Mr. Rosito and Mr. Carta and their colleagues for their work on the annual audit.
Yeah, I would echo your commentary, Mr. Manager. Does any member of the committee or the council have any questions of what was just presented with respect to the auditor's report? If we could remove the sharing of the screen, it may be easier for us to see who'd want to be recognized. Thank you. Any of my colleagues have any questions, comments, concerns?
Mr. Davidoff, this is Mayor Cantor, and I'm not getting everybody's visual. My internet is very slow. I just want to thank the auditors for their partnership and their guidance, and congratulations on the merger. And that was a really good way to present. That was sort of a new format, but a really good way to present. Thank you so much, the audit. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Cantor. Anyone else? I would echo the comments of Mayor Cantor with respect to the presentation this evening. This is probably, I don't know, 6th or 7th presentation I had, and it was very easy to follow. So thank you for doing that. I do think, though, the new standards that you were describing that are coming forward, I wish you a lot of success in working with our various directors and departments in order to accomplish that, because it seems like a lot of work lies ahead to meet all those various reportings. So I don't know if our finance director has anything to say, because I'm certain that he worked closely with you, Mr. Rivatera.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pete Perotera, Finance Director. No, I'd like to acknowledge Lisa Newton, our Financial Operations Manager, who worked very closely with the audit team, with Santo and Melanie, and I think we have a good partnership and relationship with them. We work well together, and I think it was a great audit. Thank you.
Yeah, and this is Vanessa Rizzuto from CLA, and I just want to acknowledge the responsiveness of both the town and the Board of Education. This year was not easy because of COVID. We did physically go out to the town, but we did do a lot of the work virtually, and I think just to navigate the waters through this was a feat. So thank you for your assistance.
Thank you. Seeing no further commentary, thank you very much for your presentation this evening, and we'll move on to the next item. Feel free to leave the call now and enjoy the rest of your evening, and hopefully we'll be enjoying the rest of our evening and tour as well. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
We can move back up on to the business items. Under 2A, there were meeting minutes from the January 21st, 2021 meeting. I don't know if everyone has read them, but if not, we can just accept them and receive them without objection. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Corporation Counsel has recommended a new process for committee minutes, and they are asking the standing committees to actually approve the minutes, and they will in turn just be accepted by the full council. So a bit of a change from how we've handled them in the past.
All right, well, thank you for that change. And Mr. Sweeney, do you want to move receipt and acceptance of the minutes?
Move to receive.
Ms. Fay, do you want a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor of accepting the minutes as submitted, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Mr. Hart, we'll move on to fiscal year 2021-2022 budget process and schedules. If you want to outline what we think this is going to look like this upcoming budget year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Hart, Town Manager. The town's management team and budget team, we're working hard on the proposed capital improvement program and budget, which we plan to present to the town council on the night of March 9th. That will be an item of business as part of your regular meeting that evening. And under the calendar we've adopted, you would be reviewing the proposed budget and CIP from roughly March 10th through April 15th. And we have you adopting the budget as early as April 20th, although you could go as late as April 26th under our charter if needed. What we are recommending in terms of process for this year is something I've discussed with Councilor Davidoff, with Deputy Mayor Davidoff. Given the fact that we're continuing to meet in a virtual manner, we would review the budget through this committee. So instead of parsing out the various sections of the budget and assigning them to the various standing committees, we would review the budget in its entirety through Finance and Administration, but invite the full council to participate in those meetings. Very similar to what you may recall we did last year when we quickly moved to revise the budget, the proposed budget that the superintendent and I presented when the pandemic hit. We think that would be the most efficient and effective way to do it, to get you all together at the Finance and Administration Committee level. We do routinely hold a couple of public hearings, as you may recall, one during daytime hours, one during the evening. We would seek to schedule that. We would also recommend a meeting with the Board of Education, and then 5, maybe 6 sessions regarding the management team's proposal. We would focus on the major cost drivers. We could talk about the capital plan. We can talk about revenues and other key issues as well. I will let you know that in terms of the budget instructions that I gave to our directors this year, we have asked them to keep all of their discretionary line items flat or reduce them if feasible, and we are only making increases or adjustments on an exception basis. You know, where someone can demonstrate why something needs to be increased or amended. And a prime example would be our waste management agreements, where we're looking at a sizable increase in our tipping fees. But the vast majority of line items we are looking to hold flat or decrease if possible. So that is our recommendation in terms of process, Deputy Mayor, and we would work to schedule these budget sessions with the council, making sure that a majority of you are available during the evening meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Does anyone have any commentary with respect to the suggestion on how to proceed to be similar to the last budgetary cycle?
Mr. Hart, through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure that the budget workshops will be recorded so that if a counselor can't be, they can then watch at their convenience.
Matt Hart, Town Manager. Yes, Mayor, we will do that.
Thank you.
Excellent suggestion, Mayor Cantor, and that would be helpful for anybody who can't make it. And I guess if there's an item that comes up through the budget that was discussed in committee, then perhaps the chairperson of that committee can lend more expertise to the flavor of the discussion if it's something that falls within one of our standing committees. I think that would be quite helpful as well. So, because there may be some items that have been discussed over the past 2 years that are part of this budget, so we can just play that by ear. Seeing nothing further on this item, we can then move on to item 2C, which is a presentation on cybersecurity and other IT initiatives. So, Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. I have received questions from council members in the past with respect to our efforts to address cybersecurity. And this has actually been a focus of Mr. Morin, our Director of Information Technology for both the town and the school district for several years now. We thought it would be a good opportunity tonight to talk about their work as well as the other initiatives that they've undertaken over the past year, the past couple of years. And I do want to recognize Mr. Morin and his team for doing an exemplary job supporting the town and the school district during a very critical time. And I think the pandemic has demonstrated the importance of having a robust IT system in place. We know how dependent not only town staff have become on the technology in order to work remotely when needed, but it is magnified tenfold, if not more, when we're talking about the school district and when we're talking about actually educating children in large part in a virtual manner. So very pleased to have Mr. Morin here with us this evening to provide you with a short presentation and take any questions and thoughts you may have. So would like to recognize Mr. Morin through you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Before you begin, Mr. Morin, I just want to point out that during the mayor's talk of State of the Town address, she addressed your efforts on behalf of the town with respect to the Board of Education as well as the town. And meetings such as this in a virtual nature probably would not have been so easy to do without your team and your leadership moving us forward. So we are indebted to your knowledge and expertise in allowing us to continue to govern and to do it hopefully in a secure manner. So thank you, and be very interested to hear what you have to say this evening.
Thank you for that. Jared Moore, Director of Technology. I'm just going to share a presentation here. Let me know if you can't see it. Right. Right. Can everyone see that?
Looks good. Looks good, Jared.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Manager. So I just wanted to start really focusing on reflecting on the year and how, phenomenal the team really was during a very unprecedented time with the pandemic. So obviously that was a top priority for us, just like many other departments, supporting at-home learning, the remote learning experience. We've already given out close to 3,200 devices for families in need, including webcams and hotspots. So that's been huge, and also supporting telecommuting for staff, both the school staff and the town staff, since last March. We've also launched a few websites. I've included the links here, and I'll share this presentation with you after, so you can just click on them. These have been widely accessed because basically it's kind of a COVID portal, so it's a one-stop shop for parents to go and learn what's happening with the school and the schedule and the positive cases, but also resources for basically taking care of self-service, like how can I troubleshoot my home network, or how can I request IT support from the school district, and also for staff. Projects have also been accelerated due to COVID that focus more on e-government. We've been talking about e-government for basically 5 to 10 years now, but this really brought it to the priority level that we realized, okay, we have to accelerate a lot of these projects. So digitizing close to 600 forms for internal and external use, inclusive of more online payment options, so residents don't have to come to town hall. For example, the bulky waste permit process. Working with the vendor CityView to expand the building division's capabilities to accept payments online and in person, as well as replace some obsolete databases for engineering, planning, and zoning. Google Meets, which is the video platform Google has, similar to WebEx, we've recently procured for the town side and are just starting some initial training and piloting with different departments to see how that works out. The advantage of Meets is it's a lot easier to use, as evidenced by the entire school district that kind of hit the ground running with it, and they're using it for thousands of meetings. That's how teachers are teaching remotely. That's how staff meetings are occurring. So we're going to try it out. It's a small number of licenses, just so every department can kind of have an account to share and see how it goes. And it may very well end up being the beginning of switching the entire town infrastructure to Google down the road. That'll do is give us more basically better interoperability with the school districts, the ability to share large documents, to collaborate online. That's been a constant issue with files are too big for an email attachment, so you can't share them. So this would help, especially with the hybrid environment of people working both from home and also working here at work. You wouldn't have to be turning on VPN and accessing file shares. It would just be a much easier, quicker user experience for everyone involved. As far as cybersecurity goes, interestingly, and I kind of predicted this when this was starting, it's obviously been getting a lot worse. People are more vulnerable. They're in different environments. They're at home. Home networks are not as secure. The bad actors are targeting, believe it or not, school districts the most right now. 71% of reported attacks have been targeting school districts to disrupt the internet, to disrupt learning, just kind of wreak havoc. Ransomware has been on the rise as well, which is when they basically hold your data hostage and expect you to pay. Luckily, we have a very robust backup system, so that probably wouldn't affect us, and we keep that kind of offline and out of sight so no one can really access it. Some other things we've done is we partner with vendors to basically do penetration testing to see where our vulnerabilities are. We work with all the quasi-government agencies like CSIA to basically scan our perimeter network all the time, look for vulnerabilities, look for phishing and spear phishing attempts. They come in every day. We block most of them, but they're always amusing because it's always an urgent, are you available? And it's usually getting gift cards. And most people realize, oh, wait, what do you need me to get you gift cards for? And it kind of goes away. But we have had people fall for it. Another product we've talked about in previous meetings is a product called Darktrace we have, and kind of artificial intelligence that just looks for the anomalous. So not really bad or good, but it's looking for what's out of the ordinary. So that's kind of a new tool. And then Bandura, which is another vendor we use for threat intelligence gateway, which just blocks entire sections of the world that are known to have a lot of cyber terrorism and cyber attacks that come from those areas. So it's a moving target, but we survived most of that without any major issues during the last year. Just the chart right here kind of shows in the last bar, the yellow box, that stolen credentials are on the rise the most. I haven't seen an updated one for 2020, but I'm sure that's going to also be increasing as well. It's just people doing those phishing attacks, spear phishing attacks, getting you to enter your password, and now they're into all your accounts. Another position that we talked about, Matt and I talked about it, Tom Moore and I talked about it a bit, is really the need for more project management leadership positions with all the increased demands for technology, which every department is relying on now more than ever. We really just need to look at that a little more closely. So this proposed position would be a shared position between town and schools, help us be able to take on more projects simultaneously, since the demands and dependency are at an all-time high. And I really don't see that changing in the future. Even if we go back to full in-person, the technology demands and projects, and just the expectation from residents, citizens that don't want to have to come to town hall if they don't have to. That's not going to go away. And there's always going to be the potential for, hopefully not, but we may have to go back to a hybrid environment or to at-home learning. So just being prepared for that. But COVID and cybersecurity is not the only stuff we've been doing. We're still doing business as usual. So just a few highlights. We did bring outdoor wireless to Rockledge recently, and just this past week, we switched the whole golf course to the town-wide phone system. So there's some savings opportunity there. Gets rid of those plain old telephone lines, the POTS lines, and brings them into our voice over IP infrastructure. And I'm pretty sure that was the last building we had left to do. So I know my staff's working with Renee to kind of publish that and get that out there if it hasn't gone already. We're still doing a lot with security projects, surveillance, cameras, card access for the fire department. The data center was just redone, and working with principals at every school to add cameras where there's just not adequate coverage. And this is really something that WebEx in particular brought to our attention, is the increased demand of bandwidth to do all this streaming, all this video conferencing, has really accelerated some projects we had on our list, but they just weren't a priority at the time. And some of that is increasing our internet speed. So we just recently partnered with GoNetSpeed. They're 90% installed. That's going to give us basically a 10-fold increase on our internet service for the town, and also serve as a backup internet service for the school district and the town if one of the primaries did go down. So that's really exciting, because we wouldn't be having this meeting right now if that went down, and that's a priority. So very close to going live with all that, which you'll notice is a difference. We'll have less lagging, we'll have less of the videos cutting out, and audio issues as well. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I didn't want to take too much of your time up, but I open it to questions.
So I guess if we could remove the sharing of the screen, we could see if anyone has any questions, Mr. Moore.
Sure.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions about cybersecurity or other IT initiatives? Mr. Gold.
Thank you, Mr. David, often through you. Mr. Moore, just a quick question. You were talking about GoNetSpeed and that. Has there been any alternates or any sort of alternate type of internet connection that we've looked into, maybe something like Starlink with Elon Musk, and maybe there's an opportunity to partner with them or be a beta tester in our town where they would blanket the entire town and look into that aspect and option.
We've looked at some of those products for the residential side. This was more for the internal, network. But that is a good question. I know the mayor and I and Matt, the town manager, have been in many meetings over the years looking at what's out there, and that is also a moving target. There's so many products that come and go. At one point, we were looking closely at Google, and then they kind of backed out of doing that for residential use. So it's a good question, and I can certainly look into that further for you.
Anything further, Mr. Gold?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your very informative presentation this evening, and really do appreciate you keeping us safe online and being online. So I don't know how we would have done this otherwise. So thank you very, very much, Mr. Warren.
Thank you.
We'll move on with our agenda. There's nothing under communications, so we'll move to staff reports. And first item would be finance. So, Mr. Hart, would we be going to Mr. Privatera?
Yes, Deputy Mayor Matt Hart, Town Manager. And I also want to acknowledge for whoever's taking the minutes that we had the presentation on the CAFR under the finance staff report. I don't know if Mr. Privatera has anything additional he wanted to report on this evening. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Privatera, anything further?
Yeah, Pete Privatera, Finance Director. Just a couple of updates. As the town manager stated, we're in the process of preparing the town manager's proposed budget that he will present to council on March 9th. We're also getting ready for our annual bond sale. We plan on selling $17 million of general obligation bonds the first week of March. Also, regarding the pension obligation bond situation, I've completed all of the required documentation and paperwork that the state OPM and state treasurer requires for their review. That was submitted last week, so I guess now the clock is ticking with respect to their review time, and I haven't heard them coming back with any questions. We're continually going back and forth with FEMA on our reimbursements with respect to COVID and also to Storm Isaias. And we're hopefully going to have some resolution to some issues that are being brought up. And we hope to finish our monthly forecast this week and get it to council next week. Those are really the highlights of what we're working on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Privatera. I just had one question. I don't know if it would be to you or to Mr. Hart. Will the council, once you present your budget, Mr. Manager, will we be receiving hard copies as in the past, or will we just be receiving things electronically this year?
Matt Hart, Town Manager. We will look to do both, Mr. Chairman. And, we can drop off hard copies if needed, or people can come by our location, whatever's more convenient. I know many people are very comfortable with the online budget, but others, it's useful to have that paper copy that they can mark up. So we'll do both.
All right, well, thank you. Appreciate that. We'll move on to item 4B, which is a report of human resources. I do know there was a memo produced by our Human Resource Director, Mr. Ledwith. I don't know if everybody has read it prior to this meeting, but with that said, Mr. Ledwith, would you like to present your report?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, Rick Ledwith, Executive Director of Human Resources. As the chairman stated, we will work from the document that was sent out with the agenda from Ms. Reinheimer, and I'll hit on a few key points and then certainly open up to any questions on those key points as well as anything else that was in this document. First, in terms of recruitments, We are currently recruiting for police and fire on an ongoing basis. That typically happens throughout the entire year. We currently have 9 vacancies within the police department, and we have 5 within the fire department. In addition, we have 1 opening within our public safety dispatcher unit, which we are currently recruiting for, and that position closes on February 24th. We recently made an offer to a finalist for our assistant town clerk position, which I know has interaction with the town council. And then we have several internal promotionals that are in process as we speak. Also want to give an update on one of our employee benefits. After 20 years with our current employee assistance program provider, we are moving to a new vendor on April 1st after requesting bids for this service. This RFP process resulted in $15,000 in annual savings while providing a more comprehensive program for our employees and their covered dependents. When we generally think of EAPs, we think of counseling services, and our new program certainly will provide counseling services both in person and virtually. But in addition, our new EAP will offer a wide spectrum of support for our employees, including legal assistance, financial assistance planning, child care referrals, elder care referrals. There's a whole host of online training materials available to all of our employees. So we're excited to be rolling this out over in the coming weeks. The next topic we will update you on is one that is very important to us, and that is the work that we are doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion. This work began late last spring as events unfolded surrounding the George Floyd tragedy. And under our town manager's leadership and following conversations we had with our staff, we knew we needed to do more work around diversity, inclusion, equity, and anti-racism. So we engaged the services of KJR Consulting to assist us with educating all of our staff, and we held a series of 4 3-hour training sessions with our senior leadership team this past fall, and are now moving that training down to the next level of managers throughout our organization. So we have 3 more training sessions coming up, one beginning on February 23rd. That'll take us through the next 6 weeks. Our goal will be to provide education and awareness at every level of the organization. And then once we're done with the training, we'll keep that work progressing beyond these initial training sessions by engaging a DEI committee comprised of employees throughout the town who will work together to ensure that DEI is part of all of our future decision-making, our hiring processes, and really integrating diversity and equity into our day-to-day operations. So that's something we're very excited about right now. And then one final point that I would summarize is provide an update on our new performance evaluation process that we hope to utilize in every department. Today, each department is responsible for their own evaluation process. And with this change, we're going to use one document that we will use consistently throughout the organization and across every department. The new model we will use includes a goal setting process at the beginning of the year. It would require quarterly half-hour check-ins with employees throughout the year, and then a summative evaluation process at the end of the year, where the managers will utilize this document to provide specific feedback to our employees and provide a summative annual rating on their performance. It'll also allow employees to do a self-rating on their own, evaluate themselves, for lack of a better word. And the director and the employees will use those documents to end up on a final rating. So we're in the process now of meeting with our directors, getting feedback on the document that we've created, and we'll implement any changes that they suggest into that overall document, and we'll begin rolling it out within each of our departments this fiscal year. So we're excited about that as well. And there's several other things that were highlighted in the memo. I won't get into too much detail with that now, but certainly be happy to answer any questions that the committee had around any of those, as well as the topics that we just discussed.
Thank you, Mr. Ludwig. I'd like to ask a few questions with respect to the DEI training. So with respect to new hires, how would they be integrated into the training model? And what steps are we taking as an organization to make certain that employees stay current and stay refreshed with respect to the material that's being presented? And lastly, should somebody not follow these protocols, what steps do we have in our organization to address those concerns?
So
those
yes,
are
so all
three
employees.
questions.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair, Rick Ledwith, Executive Director of HR. So all employees, incoming employees will be required to participate in this training as part of their onboarding process. And then I think the biggest piece that will roll out of this DEI training will be the committee that I spoke real briefly about. So what we'll be doing is creating a committee comprised of multiple employees across many departments who will keep that work and the focus on that work ongoing. Some of the things that we've discussed already is creating a mission statement, a diversity, equity, and inclusion mission statement, and then integrating that mission statement within each of our department mission statements. So it becomes a focus of the collaborative work across all departments. And then certainly any issues that we would have in terms of folks not, participating or certainly adhering to what we would consider a core value would be something that we would discuss, certainly between the town manager and the director, and then the folks who would be impacted within that specific department. Matt, I don't know if you would want to add anything to that.
Mr. Hart?
Thank you, Matt Hart, Town Manager. Thank you, Mr. Ledwith. Thank you, Rick, for the excellent overview. The DEI initiative is something that's very important to us, very important to me personally as well. I really think the team has taken to the conversation very well. We had some really in-depth conversations, and I think it's been eye-opening for people to hear the perspective of some of their colleagues, and that is something we really want to achieve. So we want to make this part of our culture. We often think of DEI primarily in the human resources context, how we hire people, how we promote people, how we treat one another. Yes, that's all very important, but we also want to really try to incorporate it within our day-to-day operations. When we're designing the budget, making sure we have that perspective. When we're designing programs and services, making sure we have that perspective. And I think that employee committee, what I've learned from some of my peers nationwide who've been engaged in this work for some time now, that employee committee is key to this effort and getting buy-in from the larger workforce.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. I just want a follow-up question. So do you think that we would be developing internal training materials that could be somehow libraried so that people could use them as a reference or stay up to date with respect to best practices in the employment scenario?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, Rick Ledwith, Executive Director of HR. We envision us, we're in the process of working with IT, for example, right now on an intranet system where we will be providing all kinds of employee information within that intranet website. And certainly we would have a section that was dedicated primarily to DEI initiatives. And within that folder, you'd be able to download all of our pertinent training materials as it relates to DEI, some of the mission statements that we talked about earlier. All of that would be part of that, that spot on the website for folks to link onto and gather more information. But as Matt said, I think more importantly, it'll be ingrained within our culture throughout the organization. So that will be one spot where they will be able to, again, gather those materials. And but I think as importantly, it will be something that will be ongoing and topics of conversation throughout the organization often.
Yeah, I was just thinking that if we did have this intranet sort of type library, it could also avoid liability issues that have arisen in the past because people weren't adequately trained with respect to the variety of these topics. So
Yep.
that was just my thoughts.
And all of our policies, which we're in the process of revising as well, will be found on the intranet site as well for everyone to have access to
Thank you, Mr. Elwood.
digitally. You're welcome.
Any of my colleagues have any questions about what was discussed or of Mr. Ledwith? Seeing none, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your evening. That brings us to you, Mr. Manager, as the item 4C, staff report from the town manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Hart, Town Manager. I would just like to wrap up tonight by thanking and acknowledging our staff team for their good presentations tonight, but more importantly for their excellent work day in and day out. I think when we talk about administrative services, finance, IT, HR, town clerk, and others, sometimes it's easy to take those services for granted because they're not as outward facing, as public safety, as public works, as leisure services, social services. But they're so essential. I think we all know and we all recognize that. And where would we be? How would we have fared over the course of the pandemic without the good work of IT, finance, HR, and others? Tonight we received a clean audit from our auditors. And I think in a community like West Hartford, that is what we come to expect, and we should. But that also requires a lot of work day in and day out from our finance department, but also our other staff across the organization, making sure that we're doing the right thing with respect to how we're doing our accounting, how we're paying our bills, how we're tracking everything. That's something we take great pride in, and we don't take for granted. So that's all I have at this point, Mr. Chairman. Happy to take any quick questions that committee members may have, and we want to thank you for your time and attention tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I would just suggest that for a future agenda item, I think that we should look at 3 particular departments that interface quite often with the public and have had to make a pivot at least 180 degrees due to the pandemic, and that would be the town clerk's office, the Register of Voters office, and our revenue collection office. And perhaps there's things that we have learned over the past year, things that have proven to be effective, things that we tried that didn't work, and see if we have suggestions going forward, things that we can integrate into our model of how we do business and be responsive to the needs of our residents and taxpayers. I don't know if anyone else has any other future agenda items or comments. Mr. Gold.
Thank you, Mr. David Hoffman. I know I've spoken about this before with Mr. Hart and I believe a few other of my colleagues, but I think now that we've issued the pension obligation bonds, or if they're coming out, we should be looking at other options and possibilities as it relates going forward to future hires relative to defined contributions as opposed to defined benefits and our hybrid plan that exists in town. And I think that's something that we should probably have a robust conversation at this level to determine what would be in the best interest of the town going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Gold. So noted. I think discussion with Mr. Hart and Mr. Privatera prior to bringing it to the committee would probably be in order. So, and then we could, get the necessary research and documentation necessary to discuss at a committee level. I don't know if it's going to conflict with our the next thing that we have to work on, being the next budget. I don't know if there's availability of resources to do it simultaneously, or if that's something that we would have to do right after the adoption of the budget. But I would leave that to Mr. Privatera and Mr. Hart to determine. But thank you for your suggestion. Any other suggestions for future agenda items? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Sweeney?
Make the motion to adjourn.
Ms. Fay, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you for your time, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you all.